So I'm just going to demonstrate how to make a cardboard lasagna. This is really one of the simplest growing methods you can possibly have. It's very easy. You just need a takeaway container, an oyster mushroom. This really only works well with oysters because they're so fast growing and tough. And you need some cardboard. I've just torn up this cardboard box and soaked it in boiling water for about 20 minutes. You don't necessarily need to have boiling water, but it does help to sterilize it in case there's any contaminants. And you want to be careful as well that you use this kind of nice brown cardboard, not the glossy stuff that has colored inks in it. Usually black ink's fine, but yeah, you want this nice corrugated stuff. There are sometimes fungicides put into cardboard, so if it doesn't work at all, that's probably what's happened, but I haven't had a problem with this so far. Okay, so all you do is take your wet but drained cardboard and layer it into the takeaway container and cover the bottom. And then you just take some of your mushroom and you just tear up your mushroom and put it in there in a layer. And you just keep going like that. You don't need that much mushroom, you know. Just often people just use the stems so that they get to eat the rest of the mushroom. It's good to do this with clean hands as well. Usually, you know, clean your hands with soap and water, or it's good. You can use isopropyl alcohol, is particularly good, but that dries a lot of people's hands out, so they don't like it. And yeah, you just keep layering it up like that until and adding your mushrooms. Try to add them evenly through the substrate, but it really doesn't matter much. Let's squeeze out some of the water there. That's a bit too wet. You don't want the fungi just kind of soaking in here, because yeah, you'll get contamination. And yeah, once you're finished, you just seal your takeaway container. And yeah, so it looks like a bit like a lasagna, as you can see. And in about 2 weeks to a month, what you will probably see is that this is basically all turned to white mycelium, and you don't need to do anything with this. Just leave it somewhere warmish, like on top of the fridge, and once the fungus is ready to fruit, it usually just pushes out the side somewhere, so you don't need to make a hole or worry about it in any way. Just leave it, and in a month's time you should have a small amount of mushrooms at least. So I'm going to start making up the agar. I'm going to make it in this glass jar because I plan to microwave it in order to heat it. But if you're going to be heating it on the oven, you might want to use some other kind of container, like a metal pot or something like that. So we start by adding 200 mils of warm water. Just being warm helps the agar and other things to dissolve. And I'm going to be using potato flour and dextrose to make potato dextrose agar. You could just not use normal sugar, it works about the same. I'm also going to be using a pinch of brewer's yeast to just add vitamins to the mix. But you don't need to use this recipe. There's heaps of other recipes, and it's actually good to switch them around because that helps the fungi to remain able to eat different kinds of substrates. So one thing that people commonly use is molasses, so you might just add a big blob of that to your mix. And there's things like rice malt syrup, which can be used as well. And you can substitute, if you don't have brewer's yeast or yeast extract, you can just use a little dab of Vegemite for that, because it's essentially the same thing. So I'm going to start by adding, now you can sometimes it's useful to use a scale for this. So if I was going to weigh this out using one of these little scales, I would probably use 3 grams of agar and about 4 grams of potato flour and another 4 grams of glucose powder. It's not an exact science though, it doesn't really matter if you know, diverge from that. So I'm going to add 1 flat teaspoon of agar. And I'm going to add 1 heaped teaspoon of each of the potato flour. Oh, so that was the glucose, and a heaped teaspoon of the potato flour as well. And I'm just going to mix those up, and now I'm going to take this and I'm going to microwave it. If you do use a microwave, you need to watch it really carefully, because this stuff will boil over in an instant and you'll get agar all over your microwave. So yeah, just heat it in short bursts, and you might want to boil it a few times, because often it takes a bit of mixing in between boils for the agar to dissolve properly. Okay, so I've just finished boiling my agar. You can see it's sort of changed consistency there. It's a lot thicker, and you might want to watch out if there's anything sort of floating around in there. It probably will need more stirring and a bit more microwaving to get a good consistency. So we're going to wait for this to cool down using this this thermometer. We're going to wait till this reaches under 55 degrees, preferably closer to about 50 degrees. So I'm just going to leave the thermometer in there and wait for a bit. In the meantime, I'll just show you, if you don't have access to petri dishes, these are little takeaway containers, particularly the little sauce ones are just as good. So I'll just try and open these. So you see, you get the lids on top here, and then the containers down the bottom. So yeah, this makes a good sort of little petri dish sized container, and we're going to use these today to pour our agar into. So I'm just going to get those ready. But the other thing we're going to be using is hydrogen peroxide. So this is what makes the agar functionally sterile, so that you can use it outside of a glove box or a flow hood or a sterile lab environment. So for 200 mils, I'd use 1 to 2 mils of the hydrogen peroxide. The one thing to watch out for though is that if you add it to the agar while it's hot, you will destroy the hydrogen peroxide, so that's why we need to wait till it reaches around 50 degrees before we can add the peroxide. So I'm just using a little 5 ml syringe, but you can use an eyedropper or anything else. So we'll just wait now for that to cool. Okay, so our agar is now down below 55 degrees. So I'm going to add the peroxide and start pouring out the petri dishes. You need to move fairly fast when you get to this point, because the agar will start to set pretty quickly. So I'm just pouring in the peroxide while stirring so that it goes right through the agar. And now I just take each petri dish, lift the lid, just cover the bottom of the dish. You don't need much in there. Sometimes you might find that you need to jiggle the petri dish around to make it sort of spread out, so just like that. And don't worry, if you spill some, you can just clean it off. It's not very hot at this point either, so you won't burn yourself. Another method that you'll often see people in labs use is to stack the petri dishes like this, and then lift the whole stack, pour, lift the whole stack, pour, and so on. This can be a faster way of getting it done. And now you just wait for them to set. Okay, so now the agar is fully set. As you can see, it's not pouring anymore and it's cooled down. I'm going to teach you how to do a tissue culture. Before we start, as you can see, I'm wearing gloves. It's just good to, they're not strictly necessary, but it's good to be quite clean when you're doing this to avoid contamination, and our own hands are generally the biggest source of contamination for the mushroom cultures. The other option is to just wash your hands with rubbing alcohol, or even soap and water is fine. It's not that crucial when it comes to peroxide agar. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start off with the king oyster mushroom. These are a particularly easy mushroom to clone because they're so big, and I'll show you why in a minute. So first of all, you want to get a scalpel. A Stanley knife or a kitchen knife will also do, and it's good to get one of these jet lighters, because you can just use it to basically just sterilize your scalpel, heat sterilize it like that. So ideally you want to keep going until it sort of turns red. It's probably going to be a while with this size lighter, but yeah. So then you can cool down the scalpel just by touching it against the agar. You can hear that it makes that little noise as the heat is released. So what you want to do is you want to end up so that you can tear open this mushroom. To do that, you just cut a little bit into the mushroom, not all the way. The reason is that you don't want to introduce contaminants from the outside of the mushroom to the inside. This isn't that crucial with shop bought mushrooms, as they're usually pretty clean, but if you do a wild found mushroom, it's very important. So then you just want to tear the mushroom open like that. So now you sterilize your scalpel again, cool it down again, and now what you want to do is open up your petri dish, and you just want to cut a small piece from the inside of the mushroom. It doesn't matter where, like if it's a mushroom with a big cap, you might want to use the cap, or if it's, you know, like this one, you can take it from the stem or anywhere. And now you just get that piece using the scalpel, and you just drop it there in the middle of the agar. Sometimes, particularly if you've got a large petri dish, you can take a few of these, just because that way you have more chance of one of them succeeding on that piece of agar. Then you just cover it up and you leave that for about 2 weeks. Well, that should start growing within a week, and it'll probably fill up the container within 2 weeks easily. So I'm just going to show you with a couple of smaller mushrooms what you might want to try and do. So you guys are working with an oyster mushroom, I understand, which is pretty similar in size to the shimeji I have here. So I just want to pull the lid off, and with mushrooms like these you might want to, you know, it's smaller so it's harder to tear apart, but you might want to rip them open like this, and then you know, try and get a piece from the center. It can be a little bit tricky with these, but it's also really it's really quite hard to mess up peroxide agar, so if you're making a bit of a mess like I am right now, don't worry about it too much. Yeah, So you do the same thing, and you might do a couple of those. Especially small pieces of mushroom tend to not grow quite as well as larger pieces. So then we want to sterilize our knife again, and I'm just going to suggest with something like the enoki here, I wouldn't even bother trying to get something from the inside. I'd just take a piece of the mushroom like that and put it straight onto the agar. And in a week or two you should end up with a culture that looks something like that. So it will slowly grow out from the piece in the middle and eventually fill up the plate. You can also do culture to culture transfers. So if you want to clean up a culture, for example, if you've got mold on one side or something and clean mycelium on the other, or if you just want to make more petri dishes, you can do agar to agar transfers. So it's a very similar process. Take your agar plate, and you just want to cut a wedge of mycelium off like that and transfer it to the other plate, and it should start growing. And then afterwards you can seal your plates with it. You don't have to seal your plates, but it helps them to not dry out if you just seal them with a little bit of cling wrap or something like that.